However, tonight we will be discussing the Jehovah's Witnesses, which have a much more recent church formation, do not have direct connections to the Reformation or to a Reformed leader, although, of course, many of the founders and people involved themselves have connections probably with either the Protestant Church or with the Catholic Church. So we'll talk about that. Our panel consists of two former Jehovah's Witnesses who've also appeared on the Journey Home program, Dr. Jeffrey Shrem and John Davis. Welcome. And along with these two, we have a special surprise guest, Father Mitch Pacwa, that most of the audience probably didn't realize about your own Jehovah's Witness background, but I'll let you talk about that in a moment. What I've done in these programs is to use the same set of questions throughout the programs to set a grid so we actually compare all the different denominations. But the first thing that we wanted to always begin with is to start with your journeys very quickly to help remind them of your own journey into the Catholic Church. So, Dr. Swim, why don't we begin with you?
Okay. I was raised as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. My mother was a Missouri Synod Lutheran. My father was a nominal Catholic. When I was 5 years old, my mother became a Jehovah's Witness, and I was raised in it. I started going from door to door when I was 6, gave my first presentation in front of the Kingdom Hall when I was 8, eventually became a pioneer minister, spent 100 hours a month going from door to door, and then spent a year at the world headquarters of Jehovah's Witnesses in Brooklyn, New York, which is, I served in a capacity known as a Bethelite. And so that's what I did. Eventually, I had serious questions about the history of the witnesses, started doing research in that area. That led me to return to the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, got a job teaching at one of their colleges, and during that time started reading the early church fathers, which is what converts tend to do, it seems, and then decided it was time to come home to the fullness of the faith in the Catholic Church.
All right. And this maybe, for the audience knows, you have a website I think that's very helpful for those on the journey.
Correct. If you would like information on how to dialogue with Jehovah's Witnesses and also read conversion stories of people who have left the Jehovah's Witnesses to become Catholic, you can visit www.catholicxjw.com and visit that and hopefully find some helpful information on the truths of the Catholic Church there.
All right, Jeff, thank you very much. John.
Okay, my early faith formation was as a Baptist. I was born and raised into a very devout Southern Baptist family. Basically went to church as a Baptist until I was about 18 years old. And through my own study of the scriptures, of course, the King James translation, I became a little bit disillusioned with some of the things that I had been taught as a Baptist, such as once saved, always saved, and salvation by faith outside of works. So I was really impressed when Jehovah's Witnesses came to my home and showed me from the Bible that you do receive salvation from faith and works. And so that was really what started me down the journey of becoming a Jehovah's Witness. I studied the Bible with them for about 3 years and finally converted. I immediately began what Jeff talked about earlier, pioneering, which is basically becoming a full-time minister, spending 100 hours a month going door to door, and did that for a period of 7 years. I taught a theocratic ministry school as a Jehovah's Witness for a period of 4 years. And the thing that really started me questioning my beliefs as a witness was one of their doctrines concerning the divinity of Christ. And what happened there was I was going door to door, and someone made an appeal to me about the early church fathers. I was showing them scriptures and explaining why Jesus was not God, and they said, well, that's not what the early church fathers believed. So I decided I was going to prove them wrong. Started going down to the library, reading the early church fathers, and of course I found that the early church fathers were unanimous in their belief that Jesus was indeed divine. Through the course of doing that, I also found that the scholarship that Jehovah's Witnesses used in writing their publications was suspect. They really weren't going deep into their research to find out what was really being said by these early church fathers. They were oftentimes taking things out of context. And over a period of time, I basically had a crisis of conscience where I could just no longer be a witness. Now, after leaving the Witnesses, it was another 5 years before I even began an examination of the Catholic Church, and 5 years after that I decided to join the fullness of truth.
All right, John, thank you very much. Father Pacwa.
Well, my history with the Jehovah's Witnesses is varied and long. I've gotten into all kinds of arguments over the years. One of my favorites was a Jehovah's Witness who sat next to me in an airplane coming from San Diego, where had been doing some teaching, and his eyes just lit up. and he opened up his little briefcase. And he said, "Did you know that your organization, the Catholic Church, has been lying to you about this?" So I forget the issue he mentioned. "Oh, really? You know, and I just was reading how in the newspaper here how your organization has been lying about how many members there are in there." And he said, "No, they're not." I said, "Sure, I can get you the data. Give me your address and I'll write it to you." I said, "No, I don't want to read it." And I then said, "Well, obviously you are not interested in what's true. Therefore, this conversation is over." And so he said, "Well, wait. I said, "You want this information?" "No." I said, "Well, then you're not interested in the truth. We can't converse." So that was one of my early approaches, but I think it was more important to point that out to him than really present many other arguments, because he couldn't cope with that, and to let him sit with the fact that he couldn't accept any data outside of what he already believed and look at it, even examine it critically, said, "This, you can't converse." Whereas others, I have engaged in very interesting conversations over the years where they have been able to deal with it. "Oh, I didn't know that this is not really good Greek grammar. I didn't realize that the church was making up points of grammar that don't exist." And they were interested, and they said, "I'm going to go find that out," because they did want the truth. And I think that makes a big difference in the kind of conversations we can have.
Yeah, the reason that I invited Father here is because in the production of these roundtables, what we want to do is to go back over the last 8 years and use guests from the Journey Home program. Well, as we look back, I just realized we didn't have that many extra witnesses, but I think even if you told me recently, even yourselves, you didn't realize how many there were until you came into the church and even appeared here in EWTN, and all of a sudden there's a lot of Jehovah's Witness converts, aren't there?
Yes, there's a whole lot.
Which,
Absolutely.
connected to your website, you can find out more and more about. Let's then begin with the questions that help us examine and then also compare the denominations as we've been looking at them over the last couple of months, and begin where we ought to begin. That, how did the Jehovah's Witness movement begin?
You can take it back to the Millerites if you want to go back that far. Miller was a gentleman who tried to predict the end of the world. That's where you get the Great Disappointment of 1844. And also he continued on with...
Disappointment in the sense of...
In the sense that the world didn't end. And that's what they were trying to predict. And then if you could continue on, I believe he chose 1848 as well. Well, it seemed as though, and Father can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed as though it was sort of a interdenominational movement to determine the end of the world. And what happened was, as he made more and more mistakes in trying to predict the end of the world, people tended to go back to their respective denominations, but there were some diehards that continued on that eventually became the Second Adventists. The Second Adventists in the late 1800s were very instrumental in the formation of a young man by the name of Charles Taze Russell. Charles Russell was raised in a nominally Protestant Christian home. He has a Presbyterian background. He spent some time as a Congregationalist, and then became, as he describes himself, as sort of an agnostic, rejected many of the beliefs such as the idea of eternal torment and hell, so things like that. And I think some of he describes this journey where he walked into a dusty lecture hall, and I think he heard, I believe it was Jonas Wendell preach. And Jonas Wendell was a Second Adventist preacher, and that reinvigorated his interest in Bible, particularly in chronology and trying to predict when the world would end. And from there, he got involved with another Second Adventist minister by the name of Barber, and they kind of preached together until they had a falling out. From there, and he was actually, Russell was a fairly wealthy man, and what he did is he used his fortune to start what's known as the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society in the 1870s, and from there started publishing literature and things of that nature. And then over time, Russell passed away, and Rutherford took over in the 1920s, and actually gave them the name the Jehovah's Witnesses in 1935. And then...
What were they called up until that point?
They called themselves Bible students. Oh. And then they were also sort of derogatorily referred to as Russellites.
Russellites.
Yeah, Russellites. And I know John might have something.
Well, I think the thing that really made Russell appeal to people was the fact that he was very adamant in setting a date as to here is when the end of the world is going to come. The year was 1914. He used a convoluted method of exegesis of Scripture to get there. He also used pyramidology as a way of proving that date. But it had a great appeal to people because they thought, wow, if we just make it to this year 1914, the end of the world is going to come and we're all going to be able to go to heaven. And so it had a great, and all throughout the history of Jehovah's Witnesses, that has really been their appeal, that if you only can stay alive till 75 was a saying we used to say in the early 70s. So.
What did he do with that statement by Jesus? You know, don't worry about the day and the hour. I mean, he just jumped over that, or?
Well,
because they're such biblical students.
Yeah, when I was at their world headquarters, back when I was a Jehovah's Witness, I was talking to one of their members of their governing body, and he made a very clear point to me. He said, you know, the Scriptures say we don't know the day and hour, but that doesn't mean we don't know the month or year.
I heard that comment also when I was there.
I was just something else about the origins too. Charles Taze Russell was a very intelligent young man.
Yes.
By age 14, he was already managing one of his father's haberdashery stores. By the time he was 16, he was managing 3 stores. Mm-hmm. So, very clever young man. And he was impressed with his own intelligence very deeply. So that he had a principle that if no one could prove it to him, then it can't be true. That's why he could prove to atheists that God existed, but he could not prove that Jesus was divine. And he was bested in debates in the street on whether Jesus was divine. And so if it could be shown to him that this is not true, and if he couldn't come up with a defense for it, it must not be true. So that's one of the reasons that he left. Now, that speaks to a very key element of him as a self-made man who does a self-made religion based on very rational principles as far as he or subsequent leaders of the church, or excuse me, organization, have said, because they don't consider themselves a church, but an organization.
Right.
And so that's one of the key issues. What can you prove to me or not prove to me? And it's very rationalistic because of Russell's own roots.
That's really fascinating also, Ian, when you think about where these guys came from, out of which movements, not just religious, former Presbyterians, what was going on in the culture at the end of the 19th century, early 20th. I was thinking about, you know, who was the guy that wrote the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People?
Dale Carnegie.
Dale Carnegie. I mean, some of these movements about self-discipline, almost this new business way of looking at things, Galbraith and some of these ideas about management in businesses was all kind of growing at the same time. Ford is inventing the assembly line, all this new idea of looking at industry, and here we have a religion rise up that is very, I mean, it's almost a funny analogy to say it had a pyramid structure to it because it was always connected with pyramids. Did you mention that? I forget. You mentioned that in the source. I mean, there's all these other influences that are really influencing a businessman who started this, a salesman who started this.
And who organizes it along sales models.
Yes.
Because in effect, Jehovah's Witnesses become the representatives, sales representatives, who they have to sell a certain number of Watchtower and Awake magazines every month. And here you have a great distribution system that you don't have to pay any wages to. As a matter of fact, if they don't sell, they have to swallow the cost themselves for the magazines they don't sell.
Yeah, and they're called publishers. That's what the average Jehovah's Witness is called, a publisher. You're publishing the good news by passing.
What was the book you said that you used that had such a huge publication?
The Truth Book. The Truth Book was in the Guinness Book of World Records for being, the second most distributed book, second only to the Bible, in the late 1960s.
At the time that I became a witness, the copy of the Truth Book that I had showed in the inside cover that there had been 84 million copies in print.
Amazing.
And that was, I started studying in about 1971, and I think the book was published in 1968, if I remember correctly. So in that short period of time, they published 84 million copies.
In fact, I even look at the book you have in front of you. Tell the audience about what that book is.
Oh, this was a copy of the Jehovah's Witness Bible that I actually used when I went door to door. This is the New World Translation of the Scriptures, and I had bound with it a copy of the Jehovah's Witnesses New World Translation along with the Greek text, which we call an interlinear. So you can look at the Greek, and now they butcher the Greek, quite frankly, in the translation, but I didn't know any better, so it was impressive. And then in the back of it is actually another book that the Jehovah's Witnesses used called Make Sure of All Things, which is really just a list of subjects, and then it has scriptures that go along with those subjects. So when I was going door to door, if someone brought up an objection about, well, your Bible doesn't translate John 1:1 correctly, I could flip over and show, well, here's the Greek right here. You know?
But what I was pointing is that these huge books that are published, are expecting people, the money's there.
Yes.
Someone's going to have to buy it or want to buy it. And so
Yes.
this whole business scheme that was behind this thing is kind of all through it. If we bring it up to date and look at Jehovah's Witness today, someone goes across the street, sees the Kingdom Hall,
Right.
which is in all of our communities mostly, or the people stop at your door. How does it connect with how it was founded?
Okay.
And what is Jehovah's Witnesses today?
Yeah, the first thing is if Charles Taze Russell was alive today, he would have been disfellowshipped, because the beliefs that Jehovah's Witnesses have today are only remotely connected with the beliefs that Charles Taze Russell had. The reason for that is, unlike what we're used to with the Catholic Church, where we preserve the tradition of the apostles, and they believe in a doctrine of progressive revelation. They turn to Proverbs chapter 4, where it talks about the understanding of a righteous man being like a light that gets brighter and brighter. So they feel that God is giving their organization progressive revelation. Therefore, as a Jehovah's Witness today, the one thing I would really look forward to every single year would be to go to one of their conventions or assemblies, because that's where you receive the new light. You get new understanding of the scriptures. And over time, what that does is it totally changes some of their doctrines. If you go back and look at it historically, and Jehovah's Witnesses really discourage their members from researching their organization historically for that very reason. Because you'll go back and you say, wait a minute, we didn't believe this before.
Can you give a good example of a particular doctrine that's just completely off the wall?
One of the most common things that it's used as an apologetic against Catholics that has changed radically is that they will come and say that Jesus did not die on a cross, but on a torture stake. And they'll show pictures today of Jesus with his hands up above him, nailed here, with the one nail going through the two wrists on an upright pole. And you'll see that picture all over. And that this is a way to say, look, your church is deceiving you with a pagan image, the cross. And that instead of the real issue, which was a torture stake. However, when you look at the early images of the Jehovah's Witnesses depiction of the crucifixion in Awake magazine, on the tomb of Charles Taze Russell, and many other places, it's a crucifix. They depict Jesus being crucified the way everybody always has. And so this is something that now is a big issue. That shouldn't be much of an issue, but it becomes a big issue that they've contradicted their earlier stuff in order to try to get Catholics away from Jesus Christ crucified as depicted in all of our churches. Therefore, your church is provably a bad church because you're Catholic.
Father, it's interesting because when you look at all these different groups that were rising during this time, whether they said it on purpose or not, that you see this kind of progressive revelation. Even a little, we talked about the Mormons a month ago, and this idea of where did the secret temple ceremony came from? What it kind of connects in the history of Joseph Smith as he's developing and reacting against what's happening to him. Is it the same thing that was happening with the Jehovah's Witnesses during this whole history?
When you think about this, we see a culture now where there is no universal truth. Right? Everything's relative. Well, you look at the Jehovah's Witnesses in this progressive revelation, and they actually use these words: past truth, present truth, future truth. Well, what does that do to the meaning of the word truth?
Yeah, it renders it meaningless.
It is totally meaningless.
Pilate approach.
Yes.
What is totally meaningless? And honestly, when I was leaving the Witnesses, that was the question that I have. And you have a whole group of people who have left the Jehovah's Witnesses that are searching for truth and are asking that question over and over again. And it's really,
You said the Jehovah's Witnesses. In the beginning, there was this one group of Bible students. Is there one Jehovah's Witness church today? One organization that came from this one seed?
Well, the predominant group is the Jehovah's Witnesses that are associated with the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. But you had numerous schisms along the way. When Charles Russell died, there was a big fight for the control of the society. And J.F. Rutherford, who was actually the Society's attorney at the time, and a very brilliant man when it came to internal politics, took over the Society. Actually, Russell left a will as to how the Society should be run afterwards. And there was a big argument over whether or not the will of Russell should be followed or if Rutherford's ideas for how it should be run should occur. And Rutherford did some underhanded things, basically kicked out all the people who were loyal to Russell. And what happens is now you have groups of what are known as Bible students all over the United States who actually publish tracts. One of the tracts, I think, is the Chicago Bible Students and the New Jersey Bible Students published, is known as, the title of the tract is, Did Charles Russell Found the Jehovah's Witnesses? Well, they would say no, because they believe that Rutherford took the organization on a path that Russell would find totally wrong. And so you have...
So there are groups within Jehovah's Witnesses that want to hold to old truth.
Yes. There's at least 50 splinter groups that I've been able to count that have come off of the Witnesses. One of them, like Jeff was mentioning, is called the Millennial Dawn. They only use Russell's literature. That's all they will reference. They still hold that everything he said about 1914 was true, and I've got a hard time understanding how they rationalize that. But then along the way, you have others that have broken away for a variety of reasons. For example, today there's a group known as Jehovah's Christian Witnesses that do accept the divinity of Christ. Jeff and I were talking last night about a loose-knit group of folks that have left the Witnesses that are called the Bible Research group. And so there's all of these different splinter groups. I kind of look at it as they've got their own brand of Protestantism that have kind of broken away.
What is the Kingdom Hall that we see?
Yeah, a Kingdom Hall, if you were to go into it, it really would not look like a church at all. And the reason for that is it's a very intellectual religion. They really don't have a liturgy. They don't have a formal form of worship. If you go to the Kingdom Hall, it's going to look like a meeting hall, maybe like a classroom. Okay? They may have one or two paintings on the walls, very, very modest. They do have a scripture over the speaker's podium, which they change on a yearly basis. But you basically have a platform there with a podium on it. And you go there, and the course of their meeting is really more instructional than anything else. 90% of being a Jehovah's Witness is being steeped in apologetics. So on a normal Sunday morning, you would go in, you would hear a 45 to 50-minute homily. They call it a public lecture. And then you would spend another hour reading each paragraph of an article in the Watchtower magazine and having people comment on that.
Another aspect of some of these groups that rose during the 19th century is that layers of truth, so that the introductory presentation to new people is a truncated version of a fuller set, depending on how deep you are in your organization. Is that true of Jehovah's Witnesses?
Oh, absolutely. They've got a great package that they can take to the door. You train someone very, very well. They can go to the door. They have things that they know that will be very appealing to people. We talked about this a little bit last night, where they want to talk to you about, well, do you want to live forever in a paradise earth? Think about that. And they can tie that back and say, well, look at Adam and Eve. Look how wonderful it was where they were at. They could have lived there forever if they would have only never sinned. And they'll say that was God's original purpose, and He can still fulfill that purpose for you. And so that for someone that really doesn't have a good understanding of what life in heaven will be like, that becomes very appealing. Because, again, now they're thinking, well, in heaven I'm floating around in a cloud playing a harp with little wings. Down here on a paradise earth I could be eating fruit, playing golf, walking around in beautiful parks. My kids could be petting the lions. It's a great, great package to take. So that they begin that way and then work from there.
Particularly in this day and age where we live in a society that emphasizes a materialistic worldview.
Sure.
And people know what a good meal tastes like. They know what a nice house looks like. And you're promising people that they're going to have that for eternity.
As a matter of fact, I'd say that this is a theme of the three major religions that accept Jesus but deny His divinity. That the goal is always going to be getting some things. For Muslims, it's a paradise with 70 virgins, fruit, fountains with wine and milk, gardens watered from underneath. This is what the Quran says. Mormons, you get your own planet. You become the god of that planet with multiple wives. Jehovah's Witnesses. You have this paradise here on earth with earthly delights. Because of missing the person of Christ and his divinity, you don't look forward to being with him and in union with him, engaging in the beatific vision, not just playing harps, but seeing the most beautiful thing of all, God himself face to face, and being in union with God, an interpersonal union. Yet there's no room for that kind of interpersonal union if Jesus Christ is not God the Son. And so this is a theme in all three of these religions.
In little bits of all you've said, we've heard some similar words, some similar terminologies, similar ideas. Maybe it's good to focus then specifically. And Father, why don't you get us started on what are some similarities between what Jehovah's Witnesses at least profess and the Catholic faith?
You really gave me a hard one, because it's difficult to find many similarities. That they would be very, very general similarities, because in connection with the Millerites and then the various Adventist groups that have come from there, Helen Gould White, who was one of the leaders of the early Adventists, had such a strong and vicious anti-Catholicism built in that they've done everything they possibly can to avoid being like the Catholic Church. That's a very basic principle.
Very true.
But one of the things that I think you can look at, again, very general similarities. The members are human beings. But more importantly, in terms of other similarities, they do have a structure of a leadership that is not exactly hierarchical. Remember, hierarchy means ruled by priests, and they would deny that they are priests or bishops. They don't have that kind of structure. They reject that. They'll use overseers perhaps, but they wouldn't have that. But the central headquarters is even more authoritarian. See, get into the differences, but they have a central headquarters that makes decisions. And ironically, for all the criticisms of papal infallibility, it's far more authoritarian than papal infallibility. And secondly, it is more arbitrary. So totally, again, with this change of truth. And whatever they do, they have to justify, including spirit channeling back in the 1920s by Rutherford, the leader of the organization. So they have a central leadership that makes decisions on doctrine. They also, they don't really have sacraments. They have emblems. That's what they'll call them. And for instance, they'll have on the 14th of Nisan, which is the Passover. They'll celebrate by the Jewish Passover, and they'll have the emblem of what we would call the Eucharist. There'll be water and bread. But you can only receive it if you've been baptized up until 1935. Anybody baptized after 1935 is not really supposed to consume this. So what you'll have in, I suspect, most congregations, that they have these emblems, this water and bread, and that they pass that around. Nobody takes it because nobody was baptized before 1935.
That's exactly right.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah.
And so again, there's sort of a sacrament. There is baptism.
There's a lot of things that are deceptively similar. Mm-hmm. A Bible.
Yeah, well, that's nothing. They do have the 27 books of the New Testament. Yeah, that they have similar to us. But of course, they have the 66 books of the Old Testament. So they follow the canon that that was used by most Protestants today. They would never include the others.
But different translations within.
Well, see, they used to use the King James Bible and used to publish it. Mm-hmm. But they came up with their own translation because the King James translation was just inadequate to support their false doctrines, their doctrines. Okay. And so they had to come up with their own New World Translation starting in the 1950s, and it has gone through many editions since then. And I know you guys have some of the old ones and some of the new ones see, this is where the authority of their church, I keep saying church, but it's not a church. It's an organization. It's called God's organization, not a church. What God's organization's leaders will do is when Christians come up with good refutations of basic Jehovah's Witness doctrine, then they will change the New World Translation so that you can't use the New World Translation to undercut the Jehovah's Witness organization. And they've done that regularly. Especially one of the classic example is in Hebrews 1 verse 6, where it says the angels of God worship Jesus. Now,
And we've got that
We
right
got the
here.
example right here.
yeah.
My edition of the New World Translation, which was published in 1969, says very clearly in Hebrews 1:6, let all God's angels worship him.
Because the verb is proskuneo.
Proskuneo, right. And Jeff has a 1984 edition, correct?
Right.
And then go ahead and cite it.
Hebrews 1:6. Let's see here. But when he again brings his firstborn into the inhabited earth, he says, and let all God's angels do obeisance to him.
So they changed the translation of proskuneo to do obeisance, because when it said, but it actually does say worship, then that says that the angels of God worship Jesus. And when you go back to another use of the same verb in the say the gospel stories of the temptation in Matthew and Luke, and Jesus says, you shall worship the Lord your God alone. And it's the same verb, proskuneo.
But they use it worship there, but not in.
But if you only worship God, and if the angels of God worship Jesus, that must mean he is God. So they had to change the translation. That would be very authoritarian.
It is very authoritarian, and it's also incredibly deceptive. If you go to the preface of the New World Translation, it says there that they strived to find a literal English word as a direct replacement for the Greek words. So what they're telling you is every time this Greek word appears, we're going to find an exact English replacement and use it. Yet in the New World Translation, in every occurrence where proskuneo is applied to the Father, they translate it worship. In every occurrence where it's applied to Jesus, they translate it obeisance. Now they missed the one in Hebrews 1:6, so my Bible still has it. They caught up with it later on and they fixed it for Jeff.
It's a good place to take a break. We'll come back, and we've had a hard time staying away from it. When we come back, the first thing we'll look at is the differences between the Jehovah's Witness faith and the Catholic Church. So we'll be back just a moment. Welcome back. We've been discussing the Jehovah's Witness movement. What do they call it? They didn't call it church. They call
God's
it
organization.
God's organization. In fact, for the first part of at least half century of it, it wasn't even called Jehovah's Witnesses, right? It was called Bible students.
Correct.
Variety of topics. Let's go back to you, Jeff, and the differences. What are the most significant, key, obvious differences?
There are many differences, and as you said, we've been having a hard time staying away from them.
Yeah.
The big difference is their view of who Christ is. Their Christology, in many cases, could be classified as Neo-Aryan. They view Jesus as merely a man. Before he came to earth, he was Michael the Archangel. He comes to earth, he's merely a man. He wasn't even resurrected bodily. He was resurrected as a spirit being and kind of took different forms to show that he was resurrected. He didn't even use the same body that he was executed in. So the main difference there is that they dismiss and deny the divinity of Christ, and then they deny pretty much all of the central tenets of the historic Christian faith. And so that's the
Was this
biggie.
true from the beginning, or is this one of those revelations that changed throughout the history of Jehovah's Witnesses?
They were Neo-Aryan from the very beginning. However, Charles Taze Russell did not believe that Jesus was the incarnation of Michael the Archangel. And he wrote a long article in an 1879 Watchtower magazine basically proving that point. And he used basically the same proofs that we use today against that. So that was a later development. But they've always been Arian in nature. And I think just to kind of develop Jeff's point a little bit more, since they basically are an intellectual type of religion, although their scholarship is very shallow and their theology is shallow, they really don't have a sense of grace. If you read the New World Translation of the Scriptures or go to a Kingdom Hall, you'll never hear the word grace in the entire time that you're there. They translate the Greek as undeserved kindness.
Right.
Okay, so they don't have any sense of sacraments. There's no liturgy
divinization,
involved.
that whole concept of
No.
eternal life.
Well, eternal life is different for them in that, and we kind of spoke about this before, their whole concept of God puts God in a box. I remember when I was studying with the witnesses in their book, You Can Live Forever in Paradise on Earth, they talked about God having a body. And of course the implication for that is that God is subject to time. Okay, he's in this box of space and time. So this understanding that Christians have of God entering time through the incarnation is something totally foreign to the Jehovah's Witness. And they would have, for them, eternal life is everlasting life, life without dying. Not that much different than what we have now in a certain sense. The understanding of having a glorified human body, again, is totally foreign. They don't even believe Jesus has one.
Also, they have.
Could you look up just a second? Could you look up Ephesians 2:10?
Sure.
And we'll go ahead.
I was going to say that there are three aspects of their life after death that are very different. One is only 144,000 go into heaven to be with Jesus, and that number was fixed and it can't be added to after 1935. Secondly, the people who are Jehovah's Witnesses but are not among the 144,000 will live in a paradise on earth, not in heaven. And they won't see Jesus directly, they won't be with him in that association, but they'll be in a paradise here on earth. And this is what the vast majority of Jehovah's Witnesses expect. That's why it's not a good idea to say, well, if you're not in the 144,000, you won't get to go to heaven.
Right.
They don't care. They don't care. Here.
In fact, my mom said when she became a Jehovah's Witness that one of the hardest things she gave up was the hope of seeing Jesus face to face.
Right.
Right.
And then the separation between the 144,000 and the great crowd, of which are the rest of the Jehovah's Witnesses, is even bigger than that, in that the Jehovah's Witnesses with the earthly calling are not considered part of the new covenant. They're not considered to have the Holy Spirit dwelling within them. They're not considered born-again Christians. They're considered merely friends of God with the hope of perhaps being saved through the coming annihilation at Armageddon.
They ride the coattails of the 144,000.
I'm having a post-50s moment. I think it's Ephesians 2:20 is what I was getting at.
2:20?
You're not saved by grace. We are saved by grace through faith and not by works. How would they deal with that whole issue?
Well, let me just finish the last point, too, is that the third element of the difference from life after death is that those who are damned are not damned to hell forever. They cease to exist.
Right.
And that's a very important difference between the rest of Christianity. Because he was raised a Presbyterian with Calvinist double predestination,
Right.
he said that's totally unfair and that's cruel by God, which the double predestination doctrine is.
Yeah.
And so God cannot predict and predetermine who's going to be burning in hell forever. That makes him merciless and cruel. So when those who are damned won't be in hell forever, you'll simply cease to exist and you won't be in that torment. So that's their sense of mercy to the damned.
It's interesting that you point out that he was reacting against his hyper-Calvinist Presbyterian background, which sent the whole movement into a certain direction, which then flavored it forever.
Yeah, I wanted to back up just a little bit because Jeff said something I think is very important, and that is the Jehovah's Witness concept of God himself. And that is that he is bound by time. He can move through time, but he lives in time. They do not believe, for example, that God knew beforehand that Adam and Eve would sin. They make it very clear. And the way that they rationalize that is they said, well, God could have known it, but he chose not to know it. Okay?
Sort of like knowing whether or not you have a boy or a girl.
Exactly.
You know, when your wife is pregnant.
So they constrain God considerably. If you go back to the early Jehovah's Witnesses in the 1920s, Rutherford used to preach that he lived in the constellation of the Pleiades.
Which is very occultic.
There was a physical location of heaven in this constellation, and that's where God was.
Well, you touched on the cultic and stuff. What was the aspect of the connection with the New Age movements and pyramidism?
Well, you
to
do.
what extent does that flow through Jehovah's Witness history?
You do have some groups that are into this pyramid power that can trace their history back to Russell. Because Russell was really big on popularizing the pyramid movement here in this country with all the books that he published.
And he went over to Egypt, went to Giza, and saw the pyramids, was very impressed by it, and came up with a prediction that the pyramids proved 1874 was the year of Christ's coming because of the number of inches on the pyramid. And he did, all this mathematical
Got a whole
stuff.
book on it right
Actually, this is the book right here that
Right.
he wrote.
Yeah,
It has it in it.
the interesting thing about that book is that in the 1903 edition, which that I believe is, it showed the interior dimension of the pyramid in inches, okay? And it said that these added up proved that 1874 was the date. Now, if you look at the 1923 version of that same book, they changed the number of inches so that it points to the year 1914. And there was no footnote or anything explaining it. It's just the pyramid changed.
Maybe they stopped using the English inch and started using the Egyptian inch.
They remeasured it with a
Did
different
that not
ruler.
exist?
Now, John, I think it was Ephesians 2:20. I wanted to. Is it Galatians 2:20 or Ephesians 2:20? I'm looking for a father. I'm having this, about being saved by grace through faith and not by works, lest anyone shall boast.
No, it's verse 9. That's what you're missing.
9 or 10.
No, it is not owing to works, in order that no man should have ground for boasting. We are a product of his work, and were created in union with Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared in advance for us to walk in them.
But I didn't hear anything about.
And in verse 8, by this undeserved kindness, that's what I think, that's the
no
word.
grace, undeserved
So
kindness.
by this undeserved kindness, which is the two words, one of which is a negation, undeserved, that's not in the text. The word undeserved is not there, and kindness
original
is not,
language, not in the
right,
original.
The original, no.
And in Greek, no. By this undeserved kindness, indeed you have been saved through faith, and this is not owing to you, it is God's gift. So that's
So they've completely.
Yes.
rewritten the notion of grace.
They don't have the same concept of grace that the historic Christian church has. For them, grace is something that, in a sense, what they've done is they've set up a system where God gives a person the opportunity, if they choose, to work themselves into a paradise. Which again gets to this thing with Islam and other groups where it's a submission thing, obedient thing. You do X, Y, Z, A, B, C, and you get paradise. And that's totally foreign to what a Christian would say. Grace is something that God gives us. It's power for us to live the life of God, to actually participate in the inner life of the Trinity, and that's there's no concept to that.
One of the things that we haven't mentioned in this, that I know we've mentioned in previous interviews, that is different from the Catholic Church, some of these other groups, is Christian history. What do they do with apostolic witness, early church fathers, the councils, any of that?
Basically, they focus in their apologetic on the contradictions within it, and that there were these people who called themselves Christians, and they disagreed here, and there was political infighting, and they'll try to show that the whole history of Christianity is simply one of hypocrisy and falsehood and self-contradiction. Therefore, we shouldn't bother with them. These people can't agree among themselves. That would be the constant kind of material that they would bring up. And again, it's usually they do this by showing partial quotes and taking things way out of context and not trying to understand any historical circumstances, and certainly not understanding the vocabulary that was used in those times. So that's one of the things that
They're very similar to the Mormons in that they believe that the church apostatized very, very early. They use the scripture where Paul talked about in Thessalonians about the mystery of this lawlessness, according to the New World Translation, is already at work. So that with the death of the Apostle John, at that point they believe the church had totally gone into apostasy. So they don't need to reference the early church fathers at all because they were all basically apostate, which was a real revelation for me when I started reading the early church fathers, that these men were willing to die rather than compromise the faith of the apostles. They preserved the apostolic teachings right up to the point of their death. So that created a real dilemma for me to try to deal with these folks that had always believed that they were just apostates.
And then when the Jehovah's Witnesses try to deal with the martyrdom of these thousands of Christians in the first century, they don't refer to them as Christians. They'll say the early church had these professed Christian martyrs because they don't accept the authenticity of their witness.
There's something else too that is remarkably similar to Islam, in that they will look to people of the Old Testament as Jehovah's Witnesses. So Abraham was a Jehovah's Witness,
right.
And Moses, just as in the Quran, you see that Abraham was a Muslim, Jesus was a Muslim, the apostles say that they're Muslims, and this is a constant reworking of their own history to see that all the heroes of the biblical history are in fact members of their organization. And that's one of the claims that they'll make, and that everybody else was apostate from that organization. And we are simply preserving the real faith that Abraham, Moses, and the others had.
Explain the term Jehovah.
This is a term that they recognize too, by the way, in their literature, that this is a medieval mistake, because they took the name of God in Hebrew has four radicals, four consonants, and that Jews since the 2nd or 3rd century BC have not been allowed to say the name. Only the high priest could say the name 7 times on the feast of Yom Kippur, and that was and people could hear him say it. That was it. But people were executed because if you said the name, you could perhaps be taking the name of the Lord your God in vain. And to make sure nobody takes it in vain, you don't say it except the high priest on Yom Kippur. So the pronunciation was lost in many ways. So what one medieval priest had done is, monk had said, well, they took these vowels, the vowels of Adonai, and they put those vowels, which means Lord. Yeah. And that's what Jews are supposed to say when they're reading the Bible. Or when they're out, and they're not even supposed to say that if they're not reading the Bible or in prayer. They're just supposed to call God the name, Hashem. So they take the 4 vowels of Adonai and put them with the consonants of the divine name, and they come up with Jehovah. Now, there is a Greek transliteration of the divine name that we know in the form of Yahweh. And so that's most likely more correct. And the Jehovah's Witnesses are well aware of that, right. But they use this as a convention that they had inherited because the English Bibles, including the King James Bible they had printed, used the word Jehovah.
Okay. Just to add one point to that, they then go a little bit beyond that in that they reinsert the name Jehovah into the New Testament or the Christian Greek scriptures. They do it somewhat indiscriminately, quite frankly. There's about 237 times in the New Testament where there's absolutely no justification to put the divine name in there, but they do it, and they do it specifically to deny the divinity of Christ.
But the odd part of that is, and where will they put it? Where it says Lord, because right. Adonai, meaning right. Lord, is taking the place of the divine name. And so what we'll do is we'll put wherever it says Lord, then that's Jehovah. Except in Philippians chapter 2, when it says, therefore every knee, and it's a quote. See, one of the principles is, right. When the New Testament is quoting the Old Testament and the word Jehovah is in the Old Testament and Lord is in the New Testament, then we should substitute Jehovah, except when it's quoting Isaiah chapter 45 in Philippians chapter 2, where it says, every knee shall bend and every tongue proclaim to the glory of God the Father, Jesus Christ is Jehovah? Nope.
Jesus Christ is
Lord. And they won't translate Jehovah there when it should be there by their principle.
Right. By their own, there's a similar case to that in the book of Romans as well.
Yeah. Yes.
Very similar case to that.
Well, all truth is of God, no matter where you find it. If it's true, it's of God, right? Okay. So let's look at the Jehovah's Witnesses. What can we learn from them? What are their strengths? Or then we'll look at their weaknesses. All right. But what are their strengths? What can we be inspired by?
Well, I think that a couple of things. First of all, 99% of the Jehovah's Witnesses that I knew were very, very good people. They really thought they were right. They were sincere, they were honest, and they loved God very much. And I think whenever they come to the door, if you run across them, keep that in mind as you're talking to them. These people really, truly believe what they're doing is right. They believe they're living at the time when Jesus is going to be returning and destroying basically evil and wickedness in the world. So when they are basically proselytizing you, they're doing it with a good heart and that they really truly want to save your soul. And keep that in mind. The second thing is, let's face it, they're hard workers. They work very hard. They go door to door. On an average publisher will go door to door at least 10 hours a week. As many as 20% of their congregation will be full-time pioneers, which means they're going to go 80 to 100 hours a month.
So, that we were so committed to in our evangelization and spread of the faith.
And not only evangelization, but also their commitment to their preparation.
Yes.
They spend hours every week learning how to do apologetics for the Kingdom Hall.
Yes, they do.
And God's organization. Whereas so many times most mainline Christians, Protestant and Catholic, do not spend nearly that much time in apologetics that the Jehovah's Witness would.
Jehovah's Witnesses are well trained to defend what it is they believe in and why they believe it.
All right. Are there any weaknesses, Father?
Again, there's a weakness in any organization that says, don't look at our past. This is like, don't look behind that curtain. Don't pay attention to that man behind the curtain. This is a major flaw in the organization, because you have to be able to integrate your whole life. That's part of maturity for the individual. It's also part of maturity for any organization. You have to integrate, just like we have to integrate the variety of things in our history as Catholics, like the Inquisition and so on, and say this is part of the things that were done wrong. Bad popes, we preserve the history of them. And so this is something that we know well. But the thing that we also, I think, is a horrendous flaw, besides the issue of truth, besides the issue of an authority that is arbitrary in teaching the truth at the Kingdom Hall at Bethel, the center in New York, one of the most viciously dangerous elements is the doctrine that you cannot do blood transfusions to save life even. That is not at the origin of the church. No. This is a doctrine that came up much later, I think in the 40s and late 30s, early 40s. And the problem is thousands of people have died. And there are more deaths there than in the James Jones cult. And this is something that is extremely evil. As far as I'm concerned, and a deception of the people, whereas they didn't allow a lot of other things that they changed and allowed, and this is something that they didn't used to allow and they wouldn't anymore.
That topic you just bring up, actually it would almost call for another program. I mean, it's an important issue.
Yes.
And maybe, Father, on your program, some Wednesday night, it might be an issue you even talk about sometime. I think that'd be excellent. Couple minutes remaining, two last questions I want us to, what are the main barriers that stand in the way, that prevent Jehovah's Witnesses from coming home to the Catholic Church, and what can we do to reach out to those?
I think there's a big fear, particularly with the similarity with authoritarian structure. They see the Catholic Church as this authoritarian structure, and a person coming out of the Witnesses knows that former authoritarian structure was wrong, and they say, I'm not going to be duped again. And so when they see the Catholic Church, what they see is actually a caricature of the Catholic Church that was given to them by Russell and Rutherford. And they think that they're going to fall into the same trap that they're just coming out of. And that's a real big obstacle.
Any other key barrier?
People are legitimately afraid to leave the Witnesses, even if they begin to suspect their theology, because of the fact that they will be shunned. Once you become a Jehovah's Witness, your family are typically Jehovah's Witnesses, your friends, your livelihood, all of your life revolves around that. And now all of a sudden, you're going to be left out in the cold. And a lot of people stay Jehovah's Witnesses just for that purpose.
And then another issue is that, they are not allowed to receive any information, any literature from any other church or denomination. They can't read it under pain of excommunication. So that what we have to realize is, in our witnessing to them, we have to do it right then and there on the spot. You can't say, I'll read yours if you read mine. They'll throw yours away.
Right.
They have to,
Right.
because there's fellowship.
taught to do that.
So,
Yep.
so this is something that when we're dealing with them, deal with them right there on the spot and give them, and then plant the seed and let the Holy Spirit make it grow.
So if we want to reach out, prayer, of course, is the most important thing. Love them. Let them see the true Christian faith. Know our faith. Anything else you want to throw out really quickly in terms of what we can do to help them home?
Show them the unconditional love of Christ at every opportunity.
All right.
Yeah. Even a nominal Catholic can give them a witness just by talking about our faith.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Father, thank you very much for joining us on the journey home.